As the last 5 chapters of Joshua have begun to unfold, we've noticed that they were designed to ask the question, how then should the Israelites live in the land that the Lord had won for them? A victory that is described in chapters 1 to 12, and in a land which he had apportioned out to them, as has been recounted in chapters 13 to 19. We suggested in the last few studies that chapters 20 and 21 provide 2 answers which themselves highlight 2 principles by which the people are to live. They're to respect the sanctity of life and live in such a way as to mediate the presence of God to one another and to outsiders. The 2 chapters that follow the present one describe 2 assemblies or meetings in which Joshua addresses first the leaders in chapter 23 and then the people in chapter 24 in order to instill this ongoing need for godly living among the people. The present chapter therefore finds itself in the middle of this larger section and describes both an example and several assemblies of the people. This suggests that it was designed to occupy a central role and to declare some vitally important truths to its readers. In particular, verses 1 to 9 may be divided in the following way. Verses 1 to 4 describe the 2.5 tribes who are commended by Joshua for their fidelity to the Lord. Then in verses 6 to 8, these tribes are blessed by Joshua if they maintain this fidelity. At the centre is verse 5, where the principles of fidelity to the Lord are reaffirmed. This structure highlights the central place verse 5 occupies and introduces the theme of the chapter. And verse 5 itself has an interesting shape. It begins with the words, "Be very careful to keep the commandment." It ends with, "Serve him with all your heart and all your soul." And then flanking "walk in all his ways" are the 2 statements, "Love the Lord your God" and "hold fast to him." In this way, these sections complement one another and demonstrate the fact that genuine obedience is seen in the wholehearted response of love to the Lord. Thus, the central principle, "walk in all his ways," is highlighted and amplified. At the same time, we note that most of the verbs emphasize continuous action: keep, love, walk, serve, especially hold fast. Action is required. In this highly effective way, the author is, of course, seeking to emphasize 2 vital truths. The first is that a truly religious life is seen in obedience to all that God has commanded, but not by means of the scrupulous legalism of, for example, the later Pharisees. Rather, genuine obedience is freely and willingly offered from a loving heart. Here then is perhaps the most fundamental principle of the religious life. Only love enables us to fulfill the Lord's commands. The other vital truth is that the past, present and future hold hands in faithful discipleship. What the Lord has said determines our worldview and actions. And insofar as this is sustained over the long haul, we demonstrate the authenticity of our walk with God. The central place that such perspectives should occupy are emphasized in 2 ways. First of all, these words are Joshua's final charge before the 2.5 tribes return home. And final words are normally important. Secondly, as noted above, the tribes are both commended for past success in verses 1 to 4 and then given a blessing in verses 6 to 8. A blessing that should continue to characterize their faith and conduct. The remainder of the chapter, verses 10 to 34, shows how all the tribes took such teaching very seriously, especially when it came to the matter of their engaging with God in worship. The story of the Transjordanian tribes building a memorial altar needs no amplification. However, we note that the present section emphasizes the 2 speeches of the Canaanite tribes in verses 15 to 20 and the response of the Transjordanian tribes in verses 22 to 29, together with the resolution in verse 31. For the tribes living in Canaan, the building an altar for yourselves other than the altar of the Lord our God appeared a serious matter. Thus the rich vocabulary of sin in the Old Testament is appealed to in order to describe such actions as to break faith with the Lord, to turn away from him in an act of rebellion. Thus they recognized that it was not up to the people of God to determine the fashions for worship. Only the Lord could do that. And failure was a serious matter. Such was idolatrous. It was like the sin of Peor, and brought the community under a curse. Thus, there is reference to Achan's sin, which brought wrath upon the whole community of Israel. For the 9.5 tribes, therefore, unity and blessing could not exist in the face of apostasy, even if the latter was clothed in religious dress. The Transjordanians' response was calm, and yet the disconnected statements and outcries may reflect both an eyewitness and the evidence of deep distress at the misunderstanding. The repetition of God's names, the Mighty One, God, the Lord, is no mere rhetorical flourish. It was in fact their desire to honour him that had prompted their action. They too believed that self-willed worship was wrong. Rather, their concern was that they recognised fidelity cannot exist without unity. Thus, through the dialogue, the serious threat was overcome. Leaders and the whole assembly acknowledged that no breach in fellowship with the Lord and with one another had occurred. Indeed, the altar's name, a witness between us that the Lord is God, confirmed the people's mutual recognition of their unity and their fidelity to the true God.